because they were specifically in response to some questions that had come up from some of the other people in the class, and I'd rather that they were here. So I'll go through a couple of them. Just
what happened to everybody?
so who knows?
Maybe it's just a bad week or something. I don't know, because all the classes
Or
are
a
kind
good
of
one.
sparse. All the classes have been very sparse this week. I mean,
Well, they got all
Shannon and I
their
had a fun
questions
exam
answered.
class today. You know,
Yeah, maybe
they all know everything.
That's
They
it.
all know
Yeah,
everything.
God willing.
Yeah, you're quicker than what you thought.
Okay. So, all right, I'll very, very quickly go over a couple of things that and I might just repeat them, when we have more students here next week, God willing. So one of the questions that came up was kind of questioning the way that I was sharing the idea of whether God can or cannot receive something from us. Doesn't need to receive anything from us or can't receive something from us. So I brought this to the rabbi and I asked him, can you give me a source that I can actually quote? So he said, yes. You can go to the Mishnah Torah, written by Rambam, where it's the very first book of his Mishnah Torah. They refer to as foundations, or they refer to as Hilchos Deis, the book of knowledge. And he speaks in two languages basically at the same time. So he's talking a great deal here about the foundation of understanding the true oneness of God. That's mainly what he's talking about. Why it is you need to believe in God to begin with, what it means to believe that God is one, and what that oneness is actually referring to. So then he asks questions here about, so here he says, for example, this God is one God. He's neither two, nor more than two, but one, to whose unity there is no comparison among the individual units in the universe. So we can't even refer to his oneness. It's so not a oneness. It's such a unification beyond the idea of oneness. He is incorporeal, which I'd never heard that word, but corporeal refers to physical. So incorporeal, I guess non-physical. None of the chance traits characteristic of bodies so as to be divisible or an onshoot of another being can be attributed to him. So you can't even use words to describe him, he's basically saying. So then he goes to, well then, why is it we describe him this way? Why do we say something under his feet, written with the finger of God, the eyes of the Lord? Why do we even say that stuff? He says, all such terminology is in accordance with the conception of sons of man who cannot recognize anything other than corporeal things. It is all but a metaphor, all of it. So it's there to help us understand, not to actually describe characteristics of God himself. The absolute truth of the matter, no human mind comprehends or is able to fathom or penetrate it. Can't understand it no matter what. So in reading this, here's where I felt was the key. I'll read this chapter in its entirety. It's pretty short. Since it is clear that he is incorporeal, it clearly follows that none of the corporeal changes happen to him. No joining, no separation, no place, no measure, no ascent, no descent, no right, no left, no face, no back, no sitting, no standing. Not dependent on time, neither a beginning or an end or a number of years. And that'll be relevant later on tonight if we get to it. He's not undergoing any change, as there is nothing to cause any change to him. Okay? And then here it goes on.
This even if it does make a lot of sense, at least to me, but is that regarding the issue we talked about for receive, give?
Yes.
It's in relation to that?
Yes.
Okay.
So it says, for example, if he could sometimes become angry and sometimes mirthful, that means he would be subject to change. Indeed, all kindred attributes are not present in any, save a darkened, lowly bodies inhabitant of houses of clay whose origin is dust. Meaning, These ideas only exist in us. They don't exist in him. So yes, it's the idea that he's not subject to change. So the fact that we describe him, and by the way, some of the stuff I'm going to reference tonight describes him as receiving pleasure from when we do mitzvot, receiving pleasure from us receiving. But that's just our way of seeing him. He can't. That is a final and official word. Can't receive pleasure because he's not subject to change.
Can he recognize it?
Can he recognize that we are receiving from him?
Or that we are attempting to give?
I guess again I would say in a way no, because again that would make him subject to change once again. Because if he recognizes it, means at some point he didn't recognize it. If he sees it now, it means at some point in the past he didn't see it, and he's not subject to time either. Which again, I think I hope we'll get to a lot tonight. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share about that. Then there was a question about...
if that's true, then how can he reward good behavior?
He can't. He always is rewarding good behavior, and it's our way of receiving that reward that shapes whether we see it as a reward. He's rewarding us. He is giving us everything that we asked for, which is everything. We asked for infinity. That's what we asked for, and that's what's available to us from God. But we shape how that goodness, we kind of talked about it in these terms, we shape how that goodness is incorporated into our physical being through the way that we interact with the universe. That's us.
So
we do it. We shape it. What's the purpose of giving?
What's the purpose of giving? What's the purpose of praying? What's the purpose of the tikkun if there's no effect whatsoever?
There's a huge effect on us. There's no effect on him.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge effect on us.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get to that again, I hope, without getting too far ahead. So then one of the other things that was brought up is this idea of so what's the story like with man being the descendants of apes, and what about the dinosaurs and all this? So again, I asked the rabbi about this. So he says there's 3 common teachings on this point. Again, keeping in mind, we can never really, really know the truth. Even all the things here that I'm telling you that are connected to truth, we think we got it right, but only God really knows. Anyway, 3 common ways of thinking. The Zohar presents the idea that there are 972 parallel worlds, and that all these other things, what's the significance of 972? Not really sure.
It's the zip
But-
code of Israel.
That's right. It's the area code. That's right.
972 is also silver, no?
Maybe.
It's silver, 972.
So anyway,
I think that's
it's the idea that there are all these parallel universes that kind of existed overlapping each other from a time standpoint. So that's one possible explanation. Another explanation is that it happened exactly the way we understand it from science, that some hundreds of millions of years ago there were dinosaurs, and some tens of millions of years ago, or hundreds of thousands of years ago, there was animal man, Homo sapien, that evolved from apes, but that creature was a beast, was an animal without a soul, without a neshama. So, in theory, the way that this plays out is at some point you're in Gan Eden, and here's this thing that looks like Adam, but doesn't have a neshama, and here's this Adam Rishon, Adam, who does have neshama. And that's the difference. That's the awakening, so to speak, that we talked about, this idea that human is different than animal. Could there have been a human-like creature without the characteristics of a human being, without the ability of thought and consciousness, and without a neshama? Yes. I mean, why not? Animals exist without a neshama. And actually, I heard a story today that was very interesting. Scientists have known for many, biologists, I guess this is, have known for many, many years that our closest relatives, which are the chimpanzees and the bonobos, in terms of DNA, those are our closest relatives. Okay, that a a human baby sees things that they don't. A human baby is able to see characteristics that we recognize as human, is able to behave in a human way that apes never develop. And so the way they did this experiment was they showed these babies, 6 to 10 months old, they showed them kind of a cartoon with somebody trying to climb up a hill, one of the characters trying to climb up a hill, and another character coming along and pushing him up the hill, helping him up the hill. Second cartoon, same character trying to climb the hill, and a different character trying to push him, prevent him from coming up the hill. And then 6 to 10 months old, when presented with the option to physically pick which one they want, they without, statistically, it's very, very clear, they go for the one that helps push up, that helps. And bonobos do the opposite. They choose the one that pushes down. So why humans? Well, that's part of our characteristic. You see in humans this ability and desire to help even strangers. And you don't see that in in animal populations. And in fact, if anything, they're just kind of guessing with bonobos. But one of the guesses is that that's a pretty bad characteristic for a bonobo.
By the way, it's not true what you're saying. It's not true. Because there are a lot of groups of animals that are very in the herd within themselves.
Correct, like elephant, they will help each other.
Right.
But not like
a stranger, not what's perceived as a stranger. I'm just telling you what these biologists published in this report. Yeah.
Okay, I heard the same report. Okay, and the conclusion that they're postulating is that in the animal kingdom, okay, that it was the strength, and it had to do with place within the society of those animals. Okay, that they went for the more dominant. That was the survival trait in the animals.
And that it appears as weakness, basically, if you were to help somebody else out, especially another character that's like you.
What the reason for that is, in the brain or whatever.
Yeah, that requires more study. And the next part of the study is going to be chimpanzees.
But in regarding to that and souls of humans, right? So, we all know that there are some people that you can bring them this lesson, and we're talking the other time that you have to be prepared, etc., to receive and not just come in. So, if there are people that no matter what you tell them, they would understand almost, not because they're stupid, because they're just not there to understand a type of conversation like this. Let's say people that are very, very basic in their emotional understanding. So let's take the extreme of someone that really doesn't just mitnahel b'chaim, how would you say? That life runs them instead of the other way around, which happens to all of us. But these people, their soul is almost, or the people that, slaughter other people, etc. You think that they're just, they don't have a soul almost, because they're numb, they're asleep. So, and then you can see from the animals sometimes even more soul than those. So, my curiosity is basically, you were talking about our ability to feel and to respond to prayers and doing good deeds, and I'm not
It's hard to see it when you look at a population of 7 billion people. Right?
What do you mean?
Well, when you look at a group of individuals who have dedicated themselves to study, to prayer, to whatever, it's easy to see. It's much harder to see when you look out at out at the world of 7 billion people with any variety of characteristics, some of which, again, I think even the Kabbalists, they refer to them as basically dead. Some people, like you said, their life runs them. They're dead.
So are we supposed to treat them as almost as like they're, as many of us treat animals?
Okay, so let's get into more of the topics of the evening, and let's see how this develops. Okay. Anyway, okay, so very last but not least, one of the third idea, the third idea that's commonly given is the idea that all this evidence, this scientific evidence, is kind of planted by God in order for non-believers to have something to believe in, something to question until they become a believer. Okay, 3 ideas. All right, I'm going to do an extremely fast review of what we've been talking about up until now. You know, my wife kind of asked me as I was reviewing some of these topics with her, what's the goal of anything we've talked about over the last few weeks? So the goal for me is to help us understand why the world looks the way it does. That's the goal. First, why does it look the way it does? Then, once we have a feeling for why it looks the way it does, then we can move on to, now, what do you do about it? And I know we've talked about some of those things already, but we'll get into more of the meat of it in the coming weeks. So for the time being, why does it look the way it does? Again, we started from the idea that God created something from nothing. He created a desire to receive His goodness. That desire is the opposite of what God is. God is giving. We are, at least we appear to be just receiving. There's a contradiction. We talked about the idea that evil exists due to this opposite in form. You are completely separated from the way you were created, or the source of what created you. But you need to have this strong desire to receive. It just needs to be transformed, and we're going to talk more about that tonight. Okay, so we're going to kind of start all over from the beginning again, but we're going to look at it from a slightly different perspective. And we'll go through many of the topics we already went through again, but starting over. All right. So in order to accept anything about what's going on, let's say present day, but when I mean present day, I mean the way the world has existed in physicality, what we really need to do is look at the end result. And the words that Rav Ashlag uses here in his writings is he says, only a deranged person works with no goal in mind. Okay, so clearly God had a goal in mind. Or, if we're sitting here, I'd like to think that everybody believes that God had a goal in mind when He created the world, when He created human beings. He had some goal in mind. Could this possibly have been His goal? I think we can all agree, no way this was His goal. So He had to have some goal, okay? And what it means is right now what we're seeing is, for lack of a better way of putting it, the manufacturing process. So when you've got the car that needs to be made and you see these raw materials sitting at the beginning of the line, it looks like a bunch of nonsense. And I assume, before Henry Ford's time, before there was an assembly line, it probably looked like even more nonsense. Maybe just a bunch of people standing around waiting for their turn in order to put things together. At least maybe there's more order to it when you see, I see, things are going to go down the line and different parts are going to be added. But at least initially, there appears to be what you're seeing doesn't appear to have any relationship to the end goal, unless you can see the end goal already, unless somebody says, hey, here's a Model T Ford. Here's what all these pieces and parts are going to look like, and here's my drawings that show how it all goes together. Now I have a feel for what you're talking about. And what he says, only a fool would walk into this process with no end goal in mind. So first, we need to have in our heads this idea, as we go through the rest of the concepts, this idea in our head that there must be a goal in mind that's beyond the scope of just what we're seeing here. And what we're seeing here, again, I'll use the word, for now, as we delve into these ideas further, it's the manufacturing process. It's the development process. That's where we're at. But the goal is already established. What is that goal? We'll get to that a little bit later. So, if we accept the idea that there is a God that is infinite, and again, we can challenge this idea, but for now, if we want to accept the idea, He's God, He's perfect, He's infinite, we'll call him a high quality manufacturer. You know, he's making stuff with the good materials. Then it means he must have made a good product. A high quality manufacturer values what they make, so he must have made a high quality product. So you look around the room, and sometimes you say, that doesn't seem like high quality to me.
Byproduct.
Yeah, exactly. That was the waste. That was the waste material that came off. But again, one of the examples that Rav Ashlag uses is he says you can't blame a bad suit for having been produced when it was the bad tailor that made it, or the incompetent tailor that made it. You blame it on the tailor, not on the suit. You don't look at the suit and say, what a terrible suit, what is wrong with you? You look at the tailor and say, what a terrible suit you made, right? So he goes on to quote, and I didn't find the exact section here, but he goes on to quote a story of Reb Elazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who encounters a man who's horrendously ugly. And he says to him, wow, how ugly are you? That's what he says. How could you be so ugly, or how ugly are you? I was hoping I could find it exactly.
I would never say that.
Hard to believe, right? Oh, yeah, here it is. Reb Elazar, that's what we're talking about here. Reb Elazar ben Shimon was coming from Migdal Gedor. There chanced his way a person who was exceedingly ugly. And the ugly man said to him, peace be upon you, my teacher. Reb Elazar did not return the greeting to him. Instead, he replied, empty one, how ugly is that man? Are all the people of your city as ugly as you? So the ugly man replied, Eini yodeh, I don't know.
Oh my God.
Elalech ve'amor le'uman she'asani kama mechoar kli zeh she'asita. Go and tell the craftsman who made me, how ugly is this vessel you made? And after that, he realized he'd sinned. He got, yeah. Go ask God. How did this guy get to be so ugly? He repents. They go back to his town. The town can't believe that they're speaking to this man so nicely when he just insulted him so much. And there's an analogy he makes to being soft like a reed and not hard like a cedar, as he had been to the ugly man. So that's a famous kind of discussion. But that's what happens. This is Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's hard to believe, isn't it?
With the book on etiquette.
Yeah, something like that.
So, what, right.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't have a chance to read the commentary on here. It's like almost impossible to believe
So
that he
why
could
He's human.
question him this way.
After all.
Go and complain to God that you found fault with His creation. That's what he
answered
says.
him properly, right?
Yeah,
Sure.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And that's what we need to understand
It's
as
a
well.
true
Not my fault.
So when you see a dumb person, dumb, unresponsive, doesn't listen to anything, doesn't do anything about the circumstance he's in, appears to be dead, you can think about it the same way. It's not just a physical, yes, in this case they're responding physically about how ugly this man is, so to speak. But you could say, what if he had said, wow, how dumb are you? Are all the people in your city as dumb as you are and lazy as you are? I don't know. Go ask the Creator who made me. See what He thinks. So, we need to accept there's an aspect of perfection that's within each one of us. Whether we see it or not is kind of our own choice.
The original question was because of what we're talking about, separating between humans and animals. And
Yeah, I'm kind of
the
mixing
range.
topics now, which wasn't really my intention.
Okay.
But I mean,
But
you
understood, because for me, animals are creations the same as we are, and there are some people that's supposed to have a spirit or soul or whatever, and I don't see that soul more than what I see
Right.
in certain dogs.
So then what you should do, what this is telling you to do, what Rav Ashlag is telling you to do, is at least in the initial stages of your study, you should blame God for this.
I'm not blaming anything. That's the
I know, I understand, but in essence, that's kind of what you are doing. You're saying, like we said, you can't blame the suit for being bad when it was the tailor that was incompetent. So you can't blame the person for being the way they behave because it was God that made them.
The reason I'm insisting on this point is, obviously,
What-
where I'm coming from is why we treat other beings in this planet the way we do.
Yes. Okay. So
That's the
we'll,
source of where I'm
we'll
coming
we'll get to part of that, and part of that is actually related to the idea that mitzvot between man and another man, of course I mean human and human, not literally men, are more important than those between man and God. More important, because this is how we learn and transform.
No, I'm recording this.
Yeah.
Because the other time we were talking that it's almost irrelevant because it's all for us.
So we'll get to that as well. We'll get to that as
whereas
well.
the man to man or human to human,
Yeah.
when it's
Yeah.
all for
Okay,
us.
so here's an example that I learned about. So this idea of how can it be that the entire world was created just for us, which he also goes into a little bit here, but he doesn't get to the answer. I think I mentioned this before. Rav Ashlag lays out questions. It's like this. It's like question 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then he answers them 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, sort of. So it's like question 1 or 2 is this question. He's not going to get to it kind of till the end. That's what's going to happen. But imagine this, for example. Let's say, one of us had a parent or a grandparent, and they spend their entire lives building a company from scratch. And they say to you someday, son, here's the keys to the head office. I built this entire company so that you would have my legacy to continue on from here. This whole company I built just for you. Not for me, whatever. I've enjoyed some riches along the way, but it wasn't for me. It was so that I would be able someday to give you the keys to the front office and have you run the company. The entire thing was created just for you. So you have two options of how you choose to look at that. Option number 1, wow, dad, grandpa, whatever, grandma, I don't know, thank you. You know, what you built for me, it's unbelievable. I will carry your legacy, to my own child, and I will run this business the way you ran it, or even better, and I'll make good on everything you made good on, and I'll make it better, and I'll give back any way I can to my community, to my employees, to my community, everything. Or you can say, oh, I've got the keys to the front office, and I've got the access to the bankroll, and the secretary is, she can do whatever I tell her to do. And that's another way that you can choose to see the whole world was created just for me. They're both options. That's the idea of free will. So they don't contradict each other. The idea that the entire world was created just for me, including the other, 6.9 billion people on earth, some of which seem like they're the devil and some of which seem like they're dead. They were created for me. They were created for me to interact with, to see beyond, to still see God despite them, to see how they behave like animals so that I won't be like them. Whatever it is, I can choose to behave in a manner consistent with that, or I can choose to say, well, that guy's acting like an animal, so I guess I'll act like an animal too. It's another way to choose to see that. And it's free will. It's your choice to see it either way. But they don't contradict each other. The idea that you're supposed to transform your desire to receive, the thing that God gave you, to receive everything, to receive infinity, doesn't contradict with the idea that the entire world was created just for you. It's a matter of what you do with it. And again, we'll develop this.
It's all about the tikkun?
It's all about, but there's two forms of the tikkun. There's the individual tikkun and there's the global tikkun. And you're seeing both happening at the same time. So you're seeing individuals play out their tikkun, which includes any range of people, and you're seeing the world play out its tikkun at the same time. And you're involved in both. You're involved in your own individual tikkun and trying not to get too involved in other people's tikkun other than for the purposes of correcting the world's tikkun, which again, let's see how much more we can get to tonight. Okay, so for now we're at the place of, if we see faults in ourselves or we see problems along the way or we see faults in others, the thing to blame is the Creator. And again, it's okay if you don't want to use the word blame. I don't blame the Creator. That's fine. But that is in essence what you're doing. By saying something's imperfect right now, you're saying, well, the only way it could be imperfect is if God made it imperfect. So for now, we're going to accept that idea. So now we'll kind of pick up again from a slightly different perspective where we left off before. What was the purpose of creation? What was the thought of creation? It was to benefit the created and to receive all of God's goodness. That's what it was created for. Okay? And we learned that enjoyment is in proportion to the desire that we have. So again, if you don't have a desire for a penny, you won't receive enjoyment from it. And this was the only thing, this desire for God's goodness was the only thing that was needed in order to make everything else play out the way that it's played out through history. The light never changes. The light force of the Creator never changes. There's no difference from the Creator's perspective about what's being received. What's being received. From the Creator's perspective, it's all being received. There's no other possibility. But we shape that goodness by the way we desire it, how we desire it, in what measure we desire it. And that's what creates our separation between us and the original light. We're receiving only a portion of it when we were meant to receive all of it. And that's the idea of the stone in the mountain that we talked about. The stone is a portion of the mountain. It's not what it was supposed to be. The stone is supposed to be part of the mountain, but it's only a portion of the mountain because it shaped it by its own desire to receive. In the physical world, it's the chopping off. In the spiritual world, it's the difference in form. We are a difference in form than our Creator. We are a vessel of receiving. That's how we appear, as a vessel of receiving. So, how is it that evil can come from holiness? And in fact, Rav Ashlag describes evil and holiness as clinging to God in a oneness that we can't even fathom. So going back to what the Rambam was talking about, God is of a unity that we can't even imagine. Evil and holiness cling to God in that same unity, in that same holiness. So how is it that evil can come from the idea of holiness? And the only way is through our desire to receive for the self alone. That's what happens. Our desire to receive creates the appearance of what we call evil. The thing is, it cannot stay in this state permanently. That defies the idea of creation, because we are not benefiting from creation by receiving for the self alone. I mean, are you infinitely happy? Are you infinitely happy? Are you infinitely happy? You're not. And the reason why you're not is because you have an element of the desire to receive for the self alone within you. That's why you're not infinitely happy. So clearly there has to be a fix for this. It can't stay this way permanently, because then you'll never fulfill the purpose of creation. So God created two systems as an opportunity for fixing it. So He created the system of holiness, and He created the system of impurity. And impurity is what we call being dead. Even when you're living, you're dead. You're choosing to live your life in the world or the system so to speak, of impurity. The truth is, most of us spend time between both of them. That's what we do. Most of us spend our time going back and forth between the system or the world of impurity and the system of purity. Some people spend a lot of time in the system of purity, and most of us can recognize who those people are. And some people spend a lot or most or almost all their time. They spend just enough time in the world of holiness to be living, but almost all their time in the level of impurity. And you can identify those people too. So what does that really mean? What does that really mean? Sounds good, sounds interesting, but this is all going on in the spiritual world. Now those spiritual aspects became manifest in the physical world. So we'll call it the spiritual body that exists in physicality. I don't really know how else to refer to it, because we're going to get back to that idea of body later on. But for now, we'll call it the spiritual body. The spiritual body receives the soul, the neshama, that hopefully becomes elevated to ruach and becomes the nefesh, I should say this, within each one of us becomes elevated to ruach and neshama, becomes a more elevated level of soul. That is a soul of sharing. That is from the aspect of God, so to speak. And until the age of 13 for a man or 12 for a woman, that spiritual body is in what's called decay, because all it's doing is connecting to, all that soul-body combination are doing is they're connecting to the body. They're connecting to the desire to receive. That's all they're doing. At some point, they begin to, again, 13 and 12, they begin to acquire a level of an actual soul. They begin to connect to the sharing side of their soul. And this is what we call the time of tikkun. It's a time of rebuilding. So you don't really take on your tikkun, so to speak, until you become 12 and 13. You don't become at least responsible for that tikkun until that age. Until you can begin to see, you have the maturity to see that there's something more to life than receiving, than taking. Okay? And slowly you become a receiver in order to give.
But isn't it that children sometimes have, they say, I don't have children, but pure souls, innocent souls, so sometimes they know even better than the grown-ups to tell between what's good and bad, and so it seems like it's a little bit contradictory.
So the essence, though, it's not in how they appear, so to speak. It's not in how they manifest themselves prior to that age. It's the responsibility that they have to behave in that way. So the truth is, spiritually speaking, a child before bar bat mitzvah is not responsible for behaving in a spiritually elevated way, meaning in a sharing way. It doesn't mean they can't. It doesn't mean that they can't have those behaviors, that they aren't born an old soul. I've heard people use that phrase before, that they aren't born with a level of maturity that's beyond their age. But even if they are, they're not actually responsible from their actions from the standpoint of their tikkun, of the standpoint of their correction. And again, the individual correction is always related to the idea of changing your desire to receive for the self alone into the desire to receive for the sake of sharing. We all have our individual tikkun that's particularly focused in an area that we need to correct in order to do that, but in the big picture, all of our tikkuns, all of our corrections are related to that. But you're not responsible for that until that age. I don't know if they do this in Ashkenazi shuls, but in Sephardic shuls, there's like a four-word phrase that a father says to his son at the time of bar mitzvah, and it basically says, "Finally, I'm rid of my garbage." You know this? You've heard this before? Something like that.
Yeah.
I've got it in my Siddur on my phone, but I'm not going to look it up right now.
Bless he that relieved me from the punishment of thee.
Of this. Right.
Yeah.
Shalazeh, exactly, of this. Mm-hmm. That's what you say. Again, I don't think it's done in Ashkenazi shuls, but in Sephardic shuls,
I know that, but I don't.
I know that.
No.
never heard it before.
Yeah.
When class is done, I'll find it in my Siddur. Like I said, I have my phone. And that's what it means. I'm done with my responsibility of your tikkun. Your tikkun belongs to you now. Now, you go through other phases, like when you become 20, you start another phase. I'm not going to go into that right now. But that's the idea, okay? So the point is to eventually build to the place where, even though I'm using this phrase, desire to receive for the sake of sharing, the truth is we want to reach a place where receiving and giving actually are happening simultaneously, and they're one. They're unified. So the example that Rav Ashla gives, he refers to a story in the Talmud, and it's the story of a bride and a groom. So it's a whole big section. It's actually almost the entire Talmud, almost the entire tractate is just talking about different relationships of man and groom and what are allowed and what are forbidden. And in this particular section, it's talking about how the physical process of marriage goes about. And there's the exchange of rings. There's the exchange of a ring. You know, where you say, Hare at mikudeshet li, right? May you be betrothed to me. And it doesn't. There's no such thing as Hare ata mikudesh li. There's no woman saying it to the man. It's only the man saying it to the woman. Man says it to the woman, gives her a ring. This is how they become married. It goes through a whole series of circumstances, and it gives one very strange exception. And it says, in the case where the groom is a man of stature, that's how it refers to him. The groom is a man of stature. If the bride gives him the ring, they can be considered married. And it's a bit shocking. Why in this circumstance can they be considered married? If the man is a man of stature, let's assume that he's wealthy and known in a positive way. Maybe he's royalty, something along these lines. He doesn't have need for anything. A ring isn't of value to him. Receiving a ring from somebody isn't of value to him. He kind of has. He has his own self-worth, so to speak. So in the act of receiving, what he's actually doing is giving pleasure to his bride. That's what he's doing. And he receives no reward from this.
He's doing her a favor.
He's doing
Same thing with the rich guy
in some ways, yes, except for in the case of the rich guy. So this is the next level of that story. So that story ends up where the rich man received something back. He got a reward for it. He got to feel good about it, so to speak. You know, he had something that he was able to overcome. He got over his guilt. Okay? But in this case, we're talking about a man who is of a stature that he doesn't receive anything from it. There's no reward to him, so to speak.
Sad. That's very sad.
When
you're a man of stature or whatever you call it, and then you get married, and it's saddening for me to know that he's getting married and he's actually almost doing her a favor in a way that, like, again, he has everything he wants, but really maybe nothing. I don't know.
But he got a ring, and I know that sounds kind of funny, but that's the circumstance where he actually did receive something. It's not of a reward or significance to him, and yet the betrothal, the marriage, of course, itself is something that they're both experiencing together, that they both feel reward by. She can give and receive, he can receive and give. It's all the same thing. It's all one act. Okay? And it's actually more elevated in a way of seeing it than a normal marriage. In a normal marriage, I don't know, I get right, the bride's family has to provide a dowry, right? And the groom has to buy a nice ring, and it's giving and receiving as two separate acts. And now you have an act of marriage, linking two souls through giving and receiving, or receiving and giving, that are all one and the same.
But wouldn't he feel better just for the talk? if he would ask for her hand and she would say yes, isn't that the whole thing and not really the ring? Who gives
Well,
the ring?
again, it's a very interesting circumstance, and I was looking to see if there was more commentary on this particular topic. In fact, in the way it's presented in the Gemara itself, I didn't find anything about it. They don't refer to it the way that Rav Ashlag does. Rav Ashlag is the one who's kind of seeing this and saying, why is this permitted? How can it be that in every other situation the groom needs to give something to the bride, in order for them to be married, but in this case she gave to him? It's because he is giving to her. He is, as part of the same act, he's giving to her. He's reading into that and seeing that's what's really happening.
Have a pleasure to give him.
You understand?
That's it.
It
So-
puts him once again in an even higher
Here-
That's
position.
okay, no?
Here was an example. Here was an example that my wife gave me. In a very simple way. She said, and she thought that this would ring true for you. So a kid comes to you with their Play-Doh creation, and you're looking at it. It's like it's still kind of a blob of Play-Doh, but they are so excited about it. Look what I made! It's amazing. I'm giving it to you. I love you, Daddy. Here's my blob of Play-Doh that I made just for you. And you take it from them and you say, wow, you're right. Does that Play-Doh have any significance to you? Play-Doh doesn't mean anything to you. The act of receiving is an act of giving and sharing to your child, to your nephew, to whoever it is. It's all one and the same act. You sort of receive something from it, the Play-Doh, but really what you did was you received for the sake of sharing, all in one transformative measure. There was no separation. There was no when I took it from you, then I gave something back. No, it was I'm taking it from you and you're receiving pleasure. It's all together. It's all linked. And that's what we're talking about here. That's when we say desire to receive for the sake of sharing, what we mean is receiving, and maybe you'll think of a better example for yourself than I could ever come up with or that I could reference for you here. Receiving and sharing become one and the same, and there's no reward beyond the receiving and sharing, the oneness of the receiving and sharing act that's going on. You're not getting anything back from it. I mean, for example, one of the reasons why so many cemeteries are called Chesed Shel Emet is because that's what it is. Going to somebody's grave site or going to their funeral is the ultimate act of Chesed Shel Emet. I mean, it's an act of chesed and giving and kindness without any means for reward. Chesed Shel Emet means a kindness of truth. True kindness. True kindness.
You can't get
You can't get anything back. You're not getting anything back. It's true kindness. Are you giving? I don't know. There's nothing to give to. Are you receiving?
How about the keys to the office?
Yeah, I mean, what are you getting out of that? There's things to do with that, right?
The only thing with the ring for me is just the actual ring itself. So it gives the wife the opportunity from everything that he already has to actually give him a present. That's the only thing, but not the yeah, but not the
I mean, these
concept
are
of
the
giving
best
away.
words that I've seen that to come up with that actually give us some sense of what's trying to be explained here. I mean, it's the best I've seen. There's probably better ways to explain it, but like we talked about before, these are all just words and metaphors and analogies. That's all they are. But that's the goal. The goal is to find yourself in a place where giving and receiving are unified. They are one and the same. And the way that this is referred to is that this is the transformation that takes place through performing the mitzvot. And
It's also chesed and mitzvot, it's the same
it's
concept.
they
When you're giving to people, you feel good with yourself, so that's what you get.
and that's how you begin that transformation process at the age of 13 or 12. Well, initially you feel good. I mean, and that reward is a good reward, but what you're actually trying to get back to is the original root of creation, the original thought, which is what they refer to as the last stage of tikkun, when death will be no more. Tchiyat metim, the end of death as we know it. That's what you're trying to reach. And when we reach the point where you're not even receiving the feeling of good, but actually the giving and receiving again are all the same, that's the end of death. That's Mashiach consciousness. There's more to it than that, which, again, we'll see how much more we can get to in the next 5 minutes, but that's the key. That's the bonding force. So what we can see from this is that without what we'll call the impurity of the desire to receive, there's no desire to receive the evil that had to be created in order for there to be something to change. Because you can't change what you don't have. So you needed something to change. And what's the thing that you needed to change? You needed to change your desire to receive. How are you going to change your desire to receive? Because what you're receiving is evil. So what is it you need to change? You need to change the evil into good. So they all exist. It's all, we're talking about all one and the same thing. Evil exists for the sake of transformation, because evil is the impurity of the desire to receive for the self alone, which we need in order to reach the final stage. You have to have a desire to receive in order to receive all of the goodness that God means for you to have. So the impurity is there as a result of the desire to receive, which becomes evil, which then you need to transform into the single act of receiving and sharing at the same time. Receiving and giving all at the same time. That's the whole darn thing. That's evil in a nutshell. Yeah.
Is the evil the need to desire more to the point? I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking of evil as being good and bad. Evil is being bad, that you want something and you're going to do whatever you have to do to get it.
Yeah. Well,
Is that
so
kind of what we're talking about?
right. So evil. So what we perceive as evil, what we perceive as other people's selfishness, or maybe our own selfishness, or what we perceive as something bad. So I'll go back to your example, like of the stub toe. I mean, I think you had mentioned something or I had said the stub toe. I think you had said, well, don't we understand that just to simply mean that, that you are, everything is for the good, that you're in the right place, that's where you're supposed to be, that flow with you, so to speak. So, yes, but the extended portion of the Kabbalistic portion of that is that you're a work in progress. That's a way of not specifically of God trying to wake you up to say, oh, look at how selfish and evil you are, but rather just to simply say that you're a work in progress. You're part of this manufacturing process that has to be there. So realize you're part of the whole. You are part of what must be present in the universe. What must be present is receiving. It must be present. There has to be receiving, or the thought of creation cannot be fulfilled. Okay? But receiving is the opposite of the Creator, and therefore it has an evilness to it. It has an opposite of form with God, which is all good. And that opposite of form appears to us as evil, even though, as we said, it clings to God just like holiness does. It clings to God as a unity, because it is all the same thing.
So what is our aspiration? Ma shifa shelanu. Where are we aspiring to?
Okay.
If we accept all this balance between evil
All right,
and
we'll stick it out for 5 more minutes, and let's see if we can do it. So, how can we understand that this evilness, this corruption, as we see it, could have ever really been a part of God. Even with all this explanation and all this receiving stuff and all this is how it had to become manifest. How could we ever associate this with the level of holiness and goodness of God? And the reason that it can be, that we can see it that way, that we can associate that with that way, is because God basically skips right over that step because there's no time in God's perception. So God created the universe for the purpose of giving pleasure to his created. Okay? So in a timeless world, that already exists. We are already receiving all of God's goodness with a pure receiving, sharing relationship that's all completely unified with the Creator. We're already there. And we were there when the universe was first created. Because God's vision is without time. Right? We are occupied in the manner of time. And we'll talk about what that means in just a minute too. But in God, that intermediate step where all this is happening and where it all needs to happen has already reached the end. So what's the end? The end is no more need for pain, suffering, and death. Where the spiritual body and the soul are participating in a world with God where they're receiving all of his goodness.
So the redemption day is the end of the world as we know it?
There's one more step to the redemption process. So, and let's see how quickly we can get to that. Okay, so are we kind of clear? Again, it's really hard to put this in words, but when the universe was created, from God's perspective, we were already at the point of achieving the ultimate unification with him. We were already there because there's no time. There's none of this that we are perceiving in our bodily, physical, corporeal sense. Okay. So in order for this to happen, this soul goes to what Rav Ashlag describes as 3 situations. So situation 1, as he calls it, is the thought of creation where the future state already exists. It's what we just talked about. Okay? It's a somewhat of a timeless situation where the universe is created and the future where the purpose of creation has already been fulfilled. Then there's situation 2. It's the 6,000 years, the 6,000-year process, which is the opportunity for the transformation of the soul. So if you've got the spiritual body and you've got the soul, the spiritual body is not being transformed here. All that's happening is the soul is seeing the corruption of the spiritual body, which is desire to receive, and trying to cast it away. That's all it's trying to do in that 6,000 years. And we're at year 5778, right? So in year 5778, this is how far we've made it in trying to rid ourselves of our spiritual body that is our desire to receive for the self alone. That's all we're doing in this stage. Then there's situation 3, which is the resurrection of the dead. And this is the last step. So we reach the place where one way or another, which we'll talk about what that means probably next class, one way or another, we've reached the end of the game where there is the resurrection of the dead. And this is where even the spiritual body undergoes a transformation. Okay? So the spiritual soul is trying to cast off this body. Okay? The spiritual soul, which is sharing, is trying to cast off the spiritual body, which is receiving, trying to see the evil that it's creating because of all the evil it's creating in the world and creating for ourselves, and all the way that it forms and manipulates God's goodness into ways that don't really work for us the way that they're supposed to. So all they're trying to do is cast it away. But in the resurrection of the dead, what will happen is our body will be healed and cured so that it can receive and share in oneness with the Creator. Okay? Because the soul, which is just the sharing part, is eventually going to need the receiving part again in order to fulfill the purpose of creation. That's what it's going to need. It's going to need the body back. But it can only have it back in the fully healed state. Because otherwise, there's no receiving again. We're right back to the problem we started with. So that's what's going on here. Right now, our only goal is to see how our spiritual body is holding us back and cast it away. Now, there's an unbelievable byproduct, I guess I'll say, as a result of this thought process. So if in God's timeless world, the final state and the resurrection where the thought of creation has been fulfilled already exists, then what it means is that situation one, where we are in that initial stage of the thought of creation that has a future state, is only there because of the future state. So it's a nonlinear thought process. Think about it this way. Normally, when you see a house that's standing, the house that you're going to go live in or whatever, you see it standing there, you're thinking, okay, it was built, that's why it stands there, so I'm going to walk in it. It has a very linear progress up to the point that you're looking at it right now. But that's not at all how that house was built. Here's how that house was really built. That house was built that somebody had in their mind a house that's going to exist in a future time. And they're going to put the process in motion for that house to exist at some future time. So they're going to say, I'm going to acquire land. I'm going to pay an architect to design. I'm going to work with a contractor in order to get the plumber out here and the electrician, and they're going to do some demolition. They're going to dig up and they're going to lay a foundation. And along the way, that doesn't look like a house to me. That looks like a big old pile of dirt. What is going on here? This doesn't look like anything. But that's the real process of how that house came into being. So imagine that you're building a house for yourself. Imagine you're thinking some future state where this house already exists and you're receiving all the warmth and goodness that this house was designed to give you. The heat in the winter, the air conditioning in the summer, the walls to decorate, the kitchen to cook and to share with and have parties. And the house is kind of, imagine it as a living being as well. It's the living being that gets to help you feel comfortable and to see people enjoying its presence, having you within it and having those parties and seeing kids run around it and seeing people play and all that. And this ridiculous thing that happens in the middle where, again, it looks like a big pile of dirt, and then it looks like it's just a thing on paper, and then it's a concrete slab, and then it's a bunch of wood and posts and weird things poking up from the ground. It only exists in that intermediate stage because somebody had the thought in the past about something that was going to exist in the future. So stage one, the thought, the process of creation for that house, for the planning process, only exists because the future state is already in their head. It only exists. It's completely nonlinear. And that's the way that we need to see our world. In our world, we should already be in stage 3, in situation 3, where we're in the Tchiyat HaMetim, we're in the resurrection of the dead, our body is being purified for the sake of receiving in one unified process with our Creator, because the Creator is already there.
This is stage 3?
We're in situation 2.
Oh.
Okay? So we see ourselves as already there. Understand that stage 1, situation 1, where the world was created was only done for the sake of 3 existing at some point in our future, and right now we're in stage 2 trying to get there. So stage 1 comes about as a result of, situation 1 comes out
So it's like past, present, and future.
in our way of seeing things is past, present, and future. In God's way of seeing things, He's already there waiting for us, or we're already there with Him.
But on different levels, not
Right.
just past, present, and future.
On our way of
On-
looking at that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is one of the reasons why.
One is our past. You're
No,
in the
no. Yeah,
Cre-
the way I understand it is stage 1 is the way that
it's that
this dimension was
created.
conceived, not necessarily as personal pasts. You mean, or you mean soul's past, or what do you mean by our past?
Well, that's the way I understand.
The thought of creation and the future state were all one in stage 1, situation 1.
Right.
Okay? Then everything from Adam until now is situation 2.
So
Okay?
stage 1 and stage 3 are different dimensions. Almost.
Sort of. They're more, I mean, I guess you could call them more godly
That's
dimensions.
the reason I asked you what would be the redemption day. The
Right, so-
redemption day would be
So the redemption
the
day.
end of the world as we know
No,
it. Construction is off.
the redemption day is a day that it no longer becomes necessary to cast off our body, because death is no longer necessary. That's redemption. That's fun. That's the final redemption. That's the end sof. That's the end of the tikkun
But
process.
would
That's
it
the.
be the same as what we
I
see
don't
as
know.
reality?
I don't know. I've heard it described. I've heard it described in multiple ways. It won't be necessary to cast off the body. Does that mean the body won't be cast off? There's an element of that we're going to get to later. I've read it like 5 times. Everything I shared with you tonight, I think I read 10 times, 15 times. I don't know how many times I read this through just to get to enough of a summary to even talk to you about it. And this part, the part of Tchiyat Metim, because one of the questions that Rav Ashlag brings up is he says, why is it that the sages say that at the time of the resurrection of the dead, that the bodies will first be resurrected in their unhealed, imperfect state? Because that's what the sages say. And one of the reasons why they give for this is because basically they want to be able to prove that God is not a magician. It's not like he went behind a curtain and waved something and said, "Oh, look."
So what,
Here.
they would resurrect as corpse?
Right, so if they resurrect as perfect, then somebody could say, "Hey, that wasn't the same person. God pulled the curtains over our eyes." That's the idea. That's the idea. If God resurrected somebody in a different stage than the way that they died, someone would be like, "Yeah, you're pulling my leg here. You waved your wand, abracadabra, alakazam, and you made somebody else come out." But the sages say this is one of the
I don't
reasons.
think anybody's going to say that.
Because they're all going to look like zombies or something like that. I got to read the end part again before I share more. This is the question he brings up. He basically says, hold on, that doesn't make any darn sense. Nice idea that you sages wanted to say this, but he's saying, how can we really believe that? How is that the answer to our question? Just because we don't want it to feel like God was pulling some trick on us when he resurrected the dead, that he somehow planted some other body there that was already perfected. So I'm just saying that's where he goes with it. And I don't know if he's going to get into
Because why would
what
you
it
want to
really
go
looks
to
like.
stage 2? Why would you, if you have already came to the point in which you can enter the house, why would you want to go to the construction phase again?
Well, you because from our standpoint we're not there.
Mm-hmm.
From our standpoint, we needed a desire to receive. Okay? Because when we were the Creator doesn't have a desire to receive, right? Only has a desire to share. So we had to create a desire to receive. Had to create it. So in his mind, that desire to receive is already receiving in a process of oneness with the Creator. Okay? But in our view, we're still opposite. Our desire to receive is still the opposite of the Creator. It's not a oneness. There's no oneness going. Very, very little oneness. I mean, imagine, what infinite goodness looks like compared to $100 billion in your bank account. $100 billion. You're Jeff Bezos. You've got $100 billion in your bank account. What's the comparison between $100 billion and infinity? Is there any difference between $100 billion and infinity compared to what you really have in your bank account and infinity? There's no difference between those. $100 billion is as far away from infinity as $100 is from infinity. They're the same distance apart.
Okay.
So meaning you haven't learned to overcome your desire to receive for the self alone very much. And you don't need to get there very far. Hashem is there to help you the rest of the way. But that's what this life is about. That's what these 6,000 years are all about. You had to be created with a desire to receive. That desire to receive created this 6,000 year process in order for us to get to the stage of being able to receive in oneness with God by awakening the ability to have oneness, by not seeing it as I need to take. And I don't think there's too much more I can share on the subject right now. So we'll call it a night, and we will, I'm going to say we'll pick it up there next week, but we won't. We'll go back a few steps, and we'll continue from a few steps back.